Ren
coming.
Calloway
Please,
was
hurry.
3 blocks from
Where you
home when the
talking
van
to
door
phone
slid
for?
open.
No, stay back!
Hands grabbed her. The world went dark. 40 minutes later, she was zip-tied in a trunk, listening to 2 men discuss her price like she was cargo. Her fingers found her phone in the darkness. She could not see the screen, could not dial 911, so she pressed random numbers and prayed. 40 miles away in a bar packed with 510 Iron Saints, a phone started ringing. The president answered. He heard her terrified whisper, and what he did next made the ground shake. But before any of that happened, before the van, in the darkness, and the desperate prayer sent into the void, Ren Calloway was just a girl walking home from school on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with a B+ on her chemistry test, in volleyball practice sweat still drying on the back of her neck. She was 14 years old, and she believed the way only 14-year-olds can believe, with the full and unshakable conviction of someone who has never been proven wrong by the world that bad things happen to other people. In other towns, in other lives, not in Henderson, Nevada, not on streets named Sycamore Ridge and Meadowbrook Glen, not 3 blocks from a high school that had a salad bar in its cafeteria and a parking lot full of minivans. Her backpack was heavy, textbooks and a binder and the sneakers she had changed out of after practice. Her phone was at 34%. Her mother had texted 3 times asking if she wanted chicken or pasta for dinner, and Ren had answered chicken with a heart emoji because that was the kind of exchange they had Ren and her mother Marlo shorthand built from years of just the 2 of them figuring life out together. Marlo Calloway worked 2 jobs. Receptionist at a dental office from 7 to 3, then stocking shelves at the Target on Stephanie Street from 4 to 9. She had been working 2 jobs since Ren's father walked out when Ren was 7, left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'm sorry, I just can't," and drove away in a truck that still had Ren's car seat in the back. Marlo had not taken a vacation in 7 years. She had not bought herself new shoes in 2. But Ren's school supplies were always new. Ren's volleyball fees were always paid, and Ren's lunch account always had money in it. Marlo Calloway was the kind of mother who wore her love like armor and her exhaustion like a second skin. Ren knew all this. Knew it the way children of single parents know things earlier and deeper than other kids. She had learned to cook by 9, learned to do her own laundry by 10, learned to walk home alone by 11. Because Marlo's shift at Target started before school let out and there was nobody else to pick her up. She had learned somewhere in the quiet accumulation of small responsibilities that the world was not going to take care of her. That waiting for someone to show up and fix things was a luxury she could not afford. This understanding lived in her bones. It would save her life in about 40 minutes. But she did not know that yet. She had her earbuds in, music playing, something bright and loud about being young and infinite and unstoppable. The October sun was warm on her shoulders. The sidewalk was clean. The houses on either side of the street were the same houses that had been there every other day. She had walked this route, which was roughly 500 times. She knew which yards had dogs. She knew which driveways had cracks. She knew the exact point where the shade from the big elm tree on Ridgecrest Lane crossed the sidewalk and made a cool stripe on the concrete. She was in that stripe of shade, right there in the most familiar place in her world, when the white van pulled up beside her. It was so smooth. That is what she would remember later in the darkness when she had nothing to do but replay those 8 seconds over and over like a video, stuck on a loop that would not stop no matter how many times she watched it. The van did not screech, did not accelerate. It just drifted alongside her at exactly her walking pace. A white Dodge Caravan with tinted windows and a dent in the rear quarter panel. So utterly unremarkable that her eyes slid right past it until the side door opened. The interior of the van was dark, darker than it should have been in the middle of a sunny afternoon. And the darkness was moving. Hands, multiple hands, reaching for her with the coordinated efficiency of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. Ren tried to scream. The sound made it halfway up her throat before a palm clamped over her mouth. It tasted like leather and salt and something chemical that made her eyes water. Her backpack was ripped from her shoulders. Her feet left the sidewalk. The world tilted and inverted, and she was inside horizontal, a knee pressing into her spine, her face against carpet that smelled like motor oil and old fast food. Her phone was still in her jacket pocket. She felt its weight against her hip as they shoved her down. They did not check her jacket. They had taken her bag, and that was enough for them. The door slid shut. The van was already moving. 8 seconds. That is all it took to erase a girl from a Tuesday afternoon. Her brain did something strange in those first moments. It did not panic the way she had always imagined it would, the way it happened in movies where victims screamed and thrashed and fought. Instead, it went quiet, clinical. It started cataloging details with the cold precision of a machine recording data it did not yet understand. The carpet was gray, commercial grade, the kind you find in work vehicles. There were two men, maybe three. The one with the knee in her back was heavy and smelled like cigarettes. Marlboro Reds, the same brand her uncle smoked at Thanksgiving when he thought nobody was watching. The man in the front passenger seat had a tattoo on his wrist. Cyrillic letters she could not read. Blue ink faded, probably old. He was younger than the driver. Late 20s. Dark hair gelled back. He turned to look at her and his eyes did something that made her stomach collapse. He looked at her the way someone appraises a used car on a lot. Evaluating. Assessing condition. 15 for the girl, he said into his phone. His accent was thick. Eastern European. 20 if she is undamaged. He said it the way someone might say they should stop for gas. Ren understood then with the crystal clarity that comes from absolute terror what was happening. She had seen the assemblies at school, the posters in the guidance counselor's office. Human trafficking. She had thought it was something that happened in documentaries, in faraway countries, to girls who made mistakes and wandered where they should not have wandered. She had been 3 blocks from home in broad daylight. Duct tape went across her mouth. She tasted adhesive and her own tears. Zip ties cinched around her wrists behind her back pulled so tight the plastic bit into skin like teeth. She was hauled upright and shoved against the van's interior wall, and for the first time she got a clear look at the driver. The driver was older, maybe 40, shaved head, a face like a piece of weathered stone that had spent too many winters in the wrong kind of weather. He did not look at her. He drove with the casual focus of someone running an errand, checking mirrors, signaling lane changes, obeying the speed limit. His name, she would learn later, was Gregor Dasic. He had been moving human cargo for 12 years. He had never been caught. The younger man in the passenger seat was still on the phone. Vadim Gregor said without turning, "Enough, we drive." Vadim Marin ended his call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. He looked at Ren one more time with that appraising stare, then turned to face front and did not look at her again. She had already been categorized, filed, priced. The van drove for 20 minutes. Ren counted the turns, left, then straight for a long time, then right, then another right. Her brain kept recording even though the rest of her was shutting down. She could feel her heartbeat in her zip-tied wrists, could feel the van's tires humming over asphalt, could hear Gregor and Vadim talking in low voices about timelines and pickup points and a name that she filed away in the place where her brain was keeping all the things that might matter later. Oleg. The name came up 3 times. Oleg wants her by midnight. Oleg's people will be at the spot. Call Oleg when we switch vehicles. The van pulled into what looked like a storage facility, one of those places with rows of garage-sized units and a keypad at the gate. Gregor punched in a code. The gate rolled open. They drove to a unit in the back hidden from the road by 2 rows of identical metal doors. They transferred her to a car, a Honda Accord older model gray, the kind of vehicle that disappears in traffic because there are 10,000 just like it. Ren caught a glimpse of the Nevada plates before they shoved her into the trunk. The numbers were too blurred by tears to memorize completely, but the first 3 characters burned into her memory. 7. KR. She would remember those. She also caught something else in that brief moment between vehicles. A sliver of sky. October blue, clear and perfect and indifferent. The kind of sky that does not care what happens beneath it. She looked at it for maybe 2 seconds before the trunk lid came down and it disappeared. Later, she would think about those 2 seconds, about how the sky had looked exactly the same as it had when she walked out of school 40 minutes earlier. The world had not changed, the sun had not dimmed, the clouds had not rearranged themselves into a warning. Everything looked normal from the outside. That was the thing about violence. It happened inside ordinary days, in ordinary places, under ordinary skies, and the world just kept spinning like nothing had changed at all. The trunk lid slammed shut. Darkness. Complete. Total. The smell was worse than the van. Motor oil and something acrid like burned plastic and the stale chemical tang of old exhaust that had seeped into the carpet lining over years of highway miles. A spare tire pressed against her shoulder blade. A jack handle dug into her hip. A couple of old blankets that felt damp when her cheek touched them and smelled like they had been left in a basement too long. She heard the car doors close, heard the engine start, felt the vehicle begin to move, and that is when the strange clinical calm that had carried her through the abduction broke apart completely. She started hyperventilating against the duct tape, pulling air through her nose in ragged gasps that filled her head with white noise and made her vision spark even though she was already in total darkness. Her wrist pulled against the zip ties. The plastic cut deeper. She felt warmth, blood, or sweat. She could not tell. She was going to die. The thought arrived with the weight of absolute certainty. These men were going to take her somewhere and do something, and she was going to die, and her mother would never know what happened. Marlo Calloway would come home from her shift at Target and find the house empty and the chickens still uncooked, and she would call Ren's phone and it would ring inside a trunk on a highway heading nowhere good, and nobody would answer. She would keep Ren's room exactly the same. She would wait for a daughter who would never walk back through the door. No, the thought came from somewhere deeper than panic, somewhere older, somewhere that had watched her father leave and watched her mother work herself hollow and had learned in the quiet and merciless classroom of a childhood spent figuring things out alone that waiting for rescue was how you stayed a victim. Ren twisted her shoulders, ignored the pain where the zip ties were cutting, worked her bound hands toward her jacket pocket with the desperate patience of someone threading a needle in an earthquake. It took forever. The car was moving fast now. Highway speeds of the trunk vibrating with road noise, her fingers numb and clumsy from the zip ties cutting off circulation. But she found the opening, and her phone was there. They had not searched her. Why would they? She was a 100-pound, 14-year-old girl with her hands tied behind her back in a locked trunk. What was she going to do? Ren's fingers closed around the phone. The screen had cracked when they threw her against the van wall, the impact slamming her hip into the metal floor hard enough to splinter the glass through the fabric of her pocket. She could not see it, could not risk turning it toward her face because even if she could twist that far, the glow might leak through the trunk seams and give her away. She could not call 911. She had heard them talking, heard the casual way they discussed timelines and drop-off points. If sirens came, if police got close, what would these men do? Would they run? Would they panic? Would they make sure their cargo could not testify? She could not call anyone she knew, could not remember numbers. Her contacts were all saved under names and she could not see the screen. But before she pressed anything, Ren did something that was not instinct and was not panic and was not the desperate thrashing of a trapped animal. She held still. She pressed the phone against her thigh to muffle any sound it might make, and she listened. Gregor and Vadim were talking. Their voices carried through the back seat into the trunk with surprising clarity. She could hear every word. How much did Oleg say again, Vadim asked. 15 for the girl, 20 if she is undamaged. Delivered to Apex by midnight. Building 2 east entrance. And after this one, 11 more in December. Different source. Oleg has a whole pipeline running through Nevada and Arizona. Big money, international buyers. Ren felt something cold settle into her chest. Not fear, she was already past fear. Something harder, something that felt like the opposite of helplessness. She repeated the details in her head like a chant. Oleg, 15,000, 20 if undamaged. Apex, Building 2, East Entrance, midnight. 11 more in December, Nevada and Arizona. She memorized every word, turned them into stones she could carry, because if she survived this, if anyone found her, she was going to have something to give them. She was not going to be just a girl who got taken. She was going to be a witness. There was something else too, something Vadim said that she filed in a separate place, a colder place. The place where things too heavy to carry right now got stored for later. 11 more in December. Different girls, different cities, a whole pipeline. 11. The number settled into her like a second heartbeat. 11 more girls who did not know yet what was coming for them. 11 more families who would get phone calls or would not get phone calls. 11 more empty chairs at 11 more dinner tables. The thought should have crushed her. Instead, it sharpened something, made her grip on the phone tighter, made her breathing steadier. Because she was in a trunk and those 11 girls were not, and maybe that meant she was supposed to do something with the phone in her hands and the information in her head. Her thumb found the phone icon by muscle memory. She had unlocked this phone 10,000 times. She knew where everything was, even in the dark, even with numb fingers, even with zip ties biting into her wrists like the teeth of something that wanted to keep her still. She could not call anyone specific, could not remember a single number. Every contact was saved under a name, and she could not see the screen. So she did the only thing left. She pressed 9 random digits into the darkness with no plan and no target and nothing but the stubborn refusal to accept that her story ended in a trunk on a highway in Nevada. She pressed what she hoped was the call button, pressed the phone against her ear, heard it ring once, twice, 3 times. Pick up. She prayed to her mother and to whatever held the universe together and to the defiant thing inside her chest that had watched her father leave and had decided at 7 years old that she would never wait for anyone to save her. Please, anyone, pick up. 40 miles south in a cinder block building off Boulder Highway that had a neon sign reading Iron Saints MC. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and spilled beer and the bass-heavy pulse of music that had been playing for 4 straight hours. Metallica bleeding into Motorhead, bleeding into AC, DC. The kind of soundtrack that does not so much play as occupy territory. The building was not designed for subtlety. Flat black paint, bars on the windows, a steel door that had stopped taking damage after the 5th or 6th time someone tried to kick it in. The neon sign out front had been flickering the same broken pattern for 11 years. Saints on iron off, saints on iron off, like a heartbeat that could not find its rhythm. Inside, the place was packed shoulder to shoulder with leather and chrome, and the particular energy that happens when you put 510 men in a space built for 200. It was the triannual gathering. The one time every 3 years when all 6 chapters of the Iron Saints from across Nevada and California converged in one place. Reno, Las Vegas, Sacramento, Fresno, Bakersfield, and the mother chapter here in Henderson. 510 patched members, 510 men who had taken the same oath and worn the same colors and ridden the same roads into the same kinds of trouble. They were playing darts and shooting pool and arguing about routes and runs and who had wrecked their bike in the most spectacular fashion. There was laughter, the kind that came in explosions, and the steady hum of 200 conversations happening simultaneously. Forge stood behind the bar, watching the room the way he always watched rooms, with the patient attention of a man who had learned that most trouble announced itself before it arrived if you knew what to listen for. He was the kind of man who made a space feel smaller just by standing in it. 6'5", 270 pounds. Built like something you would hire to pull a tree stump from hard ground. His hair and beard were iron gray, shot through with the last stubborn threads of black that refused to surrender to time. His face was a detailed record of a life lived without caution. A nose broken and healed in 3 different directions. A scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw like a river on a map of bad decisions. Eyes the color of concrete in January. His arms were crossed over his chest and covered in faded ink. Skulls and engines and dates that meant something to him and nothing to anyone else. But on his right forearm, set apart from the rest, was a tattoo that had a different quality. Not faded, not rough. A small angel drawn in simple, clean lines. Beneath it, a name and 2 dates. Kira, 1981 to 1995. His sister, 14 years old when she disappeared from a mall parking lot in Reno on a Saturday afternoon in March. She had been buying shoes. She had called him 20 minutes before to ask if he thought the blue ones or the white ones were better. He had said blue. She had laughed and said she was going to get the white ones anyway. It was the last thing she ever said to him. Forge had been 19, old enough to ride, old enough to fight, not old enough to protect the one person who mattered more than any of it. He had spent 6 months looking, knocking on doors, showing her photograph to strangers who shook their heads and looked away. He spent 6 years after that widening the circle, following leads that went cold, chasing rumors that dissolved into nothing. Then he had never stopped looking. He just learned to live around the hole she left behind, the way a river learns to flow around a boulder, never forgetting the obstruction, just finding a way to keep moving despite it. Every year on March 15th, he rode to the mall parking lot in Reno and sat on his bike for an hour. He did not know what he expected to find. He did not expect anything. He just went. Because stopping felt like forgetting, and forgetting felt like the one betrayal he could not survive. The phone rang. It was sitting on the shelf behind the bar, a burner cell that got used for club business and nothing else. The screen showed an unknown number, area code 702, local. Forge looked at it with the automatic irritation of a man who had been interrupted 10,000 times before and had never once enjoyed it. He almost sent it to voicemail, almost. His hand picked up the phone. His thumb hovered over the decline button for one full second. Then something made him press accept instead. Not logic, not reason, something older and less explainable. The same instinct that makes you turn your head right before a car runs a red light. The same quiet voice that tells you to check on someone you have not thought about in years. Forge did not understand it. He would not question it. He brought the phone to his ear. "Speak," he said. His voice sounded like gravel being fed through a cement mixer. Silence, not dead air, the kind of silence that has texture. Road noise, an engine, fabric rustling against a microphone. And then so faint he almost missed it under the noise of the bar behind him, a sound that made every muscle in his body lock rigid. A sob, small, muffled, terrified. A child. Forge's left hand came up in a single smooth motion. Palm flat, fingers spread. It was a gesture every man in that room knew. A command that had been obeyed without question for 15 years. Stop everything now. The music died first. Someone pulled the plug before Forge's hand came back down. The conversations cut off mid-sentence like someone had hit a mute button on 200 voices simultaneously. Pool cues froze mid-stroke. Darts stopped in mid-throw. 510 men turned to look at their president standing behind the bar with a phone pressed to his ear and an expression on his face that most of them had only seen twice before. Both times people had ended up in the hospital. Forge turned slightly away from the room. His massive shoulders hunched forward as if trying to create a pocket of privacy around the receiver. When he spoke again, his voice had undergone a transformation that would have shocked anyone who had only ever heard the gravel and thunder version. It was still low, still careful, but it was soft, the kind of soft that comes from a man who has broken many things in his life and is now trying with enormous concentration not to break something fragile. "Hey," he said, "I can hear you breathing. You do not have to say anything yet. Just let me know you are there. Tap the phone once if you can hear me." A pause that stretched like wire being pulled to its breaking point. Then a single tap, faint but clear. Forge closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, something had changed behind them. Something cold and absolute was assembling itself, putting on armor, reaching for weapons. But his voice stayed soft. "Good. That is real good. Now I need you to stay calm and listen to me. Okay, my name is Forge. I know that sounds strange, but I promise you I am not going to hurt you. I am going to help you. Do you believe me?" Another tap. "Okay, I need to know some things. Are you hurt?" Tap once for yes, twice for no. 2 taps. "Are you alone?" 2 taps. "Are the people with you the ones who hurt you?" 1 tap. Forge's jaw tightened until the muscles stood out like bridge cables. Behind him, 510 men waited in perfect silence. Some of them had been to prison. Some of them had done things that followed them into sleep. But every single one of them was staring at their president's back and understanding without a word being spoken that something had just shifted in the room's gravity. "Can you talk?" Forge asked. 2 taps. Duct tape, he thought. Or a gag. "Are you in a vehicle?" 1 tap. Trunk. 1 tap. "Okay, sweetheart. You are doing perfect. You are so brave. Now I am going to ask you to do something and I need you to trust me. Can you make any noise? Kick something. Anything so I can hear where you are." There was a pause, then a series of muffled thumps, the sound of small feet kicking the inside of a trunk lid. Faint but audible. Forge listened with the focus of a man who had spent 30 years learning to read meaning in engine noises and wind direction and the way gravel sounded under different tires at different speeds. "I hear you," he said. You are in a car. Sedan maybe, moving fast, highway speeds. Then he heard something else. Something that made his blood drop 20 degrees. A voice in the background. Male. Casual. Accented English. How much did Oleg say again? In a second voice. 15 for the girl, 20 if she is undamaged. Laughter. Forge's free hand gripped the edge of the bar. The wood creaked. A crack appeared in the varnish where his thumb pressed. Every man in that room saw it. Every man understood at the end. I need you to listen very carefully, Forge said. His voice was still soft, but it carried an undertone now, like distant thunder rolling along a mountain ridge. Those men took you. They hurt you. But they made a mistake. They let you keep your phone. And you called me. You called exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Now I need to know. Did you hear them say anything? Anything about where they are taking you or who they are working for? Can you try to tell me? What happened next was the thing that changed everything. The thing that transformed a random phone call from a terrified child into something far more dangerous for the men in the front seat of that Honda Accord. Ren began to tap, not random taps, not the frantic, desperate tapping of a child in panic. Slow, deliberate, patterned. One tap for A, two for B, three for C, patient as a telegraph operator sending code through a wire that stretched across a continent. Each letter took seconds, each word took minutes. Her fingers were numb and swollen from the zip ties, and every tap sent a jolt of pain from her wrists to her shoulders. She did not stop. She did not slow down. She tapped with the grim focus of someone who understood that the information in her head was the most valuable thing in that trunk, and she was going to get it out if it took every ounce of strength she had left. Forge grabbed a pen, started writing on a bar napkin. The room watched. 510 men barely breathing. 510 men who had spent their lives being loud and hard and unsubtle, standing in perfect silence while a 14-year-old girl tapped out letters from inside a moving coffin. A PEX. Apex, Forge said aloud. The old warehouse district. From across the room, a broad-shouldered man named Cutter, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms, nodded grimly. Industrial complex off Apex Road. Abandoned 3 years. 6 main buildings. Ren kept tapping. BUILDING. 2. Building 2, Forge repeated. He wrote it down. East entrance. More taps. Slower now. Her fingers must have been numb. The zip ties cutting off circulation. Every letter a small act of defiance against the darkness and the fear and the plastic digging into her wrists. OLEK. Forge stopped writing. The pen hovered above the napkin. His face did something that the men closest to him would remember for the rest of their lives. It went blank. Not angry, not shocked. Blank in the way that a screen goes blank right before it displays something you do not want to see. Oleg, he knew that name. 15 years ago, in the chaos and grief and desperate searching that followed Kira's disappearance, a single lead had surfaced. A name whispered by a street informant in a bar in Sparks, Nevada at 2 in the morning. The informant was a small-time methamphetamine dealer who owed Forge a favor and paid it with 4 words. Ask about a man named Oleg. The informant disappeared 2 days later. Left town or left the earth, nobody ever determined which. The Reno police had noted the name in their file, written it on a form, put the form in a folder, put the folder in a cabinet, and closed the cabinet. The name led nowhere they were willing to follow. Too vague, too foreign, too connected to organizations that made local police departments uncomfortable. But Forge had never closed his cabinet, had never filed the name away, had carried it in a locked room in the back of his mind for 15 years, a door he checked every time a new piece of information about trafficking crossed his radar, waiting for the key. And now a 14-year-old girl zip-tied in a trunk, tapping letters with numb fingers on a cracked phone, had just slid that key into the lock. Oleg, the same name, the same network, 25 years of operation. How many girls, how many trunks, how many families sitting at dinner tables with an empty chair? Forge's mind calculated the math, and the number that came back was a number that no human being should ever have to hold in their head. He did not say any of this, did not let the earthquake behind his eyes reach his voice. He put the pen down, picked the phone back up. You did real good, he said to Ren. That is more than good. That is everything. Now I need you to do one more thing. Check your battery. How much have you got? Rustling, a pause, then taps. 2, 3, 23%. We can work with that. Turn your brightness all the way down. Save every drop. And listen to me now. I need you to know something. I am not alone here. I have a lot of friends who are very good at finding people. We are coming for you. I promise you that. Do you believe me? The pause was longer this time. Forge could almost feel the 14-year-old girl in that trunk 40 miles away, trying to decide if this voice on the phone was real or just another lie in a day that had been nothing but lies. Then one tap. Forge turned to face the room. 510 pairs of eyes locked on him. He lowered the phone slightly, covered the mic with his palm. When he spoke, his voice was not loud. It did not need to be. In the perfect silence, it reached every corner of the room, every ear, every heart. There is a 14-year-old girl in a trunk somewhere on a highway right now. Her name is Ren. She was kidnapped in broad daylight 3 blocks from her school. She called us by accident. He paused. She could not have called anyone better. From a table near the back wall, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of face that belonged in a computer lab instead of a biker bar shot to his feet. Spark was 26 years old, the youngest patched member in the chapter's history, and he was already pulling a laptop from his bag before his name was called. Spark Forge said, "I need a trace, cell tower triangulation, traffic cameras, everything." "Give me the number," Spark said. His fingers were already moving across the keyboard with the fluid speed of someone who thought in code and dreamed in data streams. Forge read it off. Spark's eyes moved across 3 screens, simultaneously accessing tools and databases that the club maintained with careful precision and careful silence. Tools that existed in a gray area between legal and not legal, between what the system allowed and what the system could not do fast enough. "Got a ping," Spark said 15 seconds later. "Cell tower on Route 95 Northeast Corridor. Signal moving approximately 70 miles per hour. Direction northeast toward North Las Vegas." Forge brought the phone back to his ear. "You still with me?" One tap. "Yeah." "Good girl. We found you. We are tracking you right now. I need you to tell me everything you can hear. Do not talk. Just listen and tell me what is around you." There was a long pause, then tapping. Multiple taps in different rhythms. Ren was trying to communicate something complex. Highway noise. Smooth road. Engine sounds. Radio playing faintly in the front seat. Forge decoded each pattern with the patience of a man who understood that the girl on the other end of this call was performing a miracle of courage and precision from inside a locked trunk with her hands tied behind her back. "You hear them talking?" Forge asked. One tap. "Did they say where they are taking you?" One tap. "Apex Industrial District," Forge confirmed. "Building 2, East Entrance." One tap. Forge looked at Cutter. "Building 2. Cutter nodded. "I know it. 2 vehicle bays, loading dock on the east side, access road from Apex Road plus a gap in the fence on the east perimeter." "Then that is where she is going," Forge said. He raised his voice, not to a shout, to the voice that commanded, the voice that had led this club for 15 years through every kind of storm. "We ride in 5 minutes. Full chapter. Every bike." The room erupted, not into chaos, into purpose. 510 men moving with the coordinated efficiency of a machine that had been built over decades and tested in circumstances that most people would never have to face and would never want to. Jackets grabbed from hooks and chairbacks, helmets pulled from shelves and the tops of jukeboxes and the corners of pool tables where they had been set down hours ago when the night was still about brotherhood and beer and nothing more. Weapons checked with the kind of casual discretion that suggested this was not the first time these men had prepared for violence on short notice. Chain wallets adjusted, rings turned so the heavy sides faced outward, knives confirmed in boots and belt sheaths. Nobody discussed it. Nobody had to. These were men who had grown up in a world where preparation was not paranoia. It was survival. Cutter was already on the radio coordinating with road captains from the other 5 chapters. Sacramento chapter north approach. Reno chapter east flank. Fresno and Bakersfield west perimeter. Vegas chapter you are with mother chapter straight up 95. The instructions were brief and clear and received without question. Every road captain, knew the drill. Every road captain had run formations like this before, though never at this scale and never for these stakes. Spark was packing his laptop into a waterproof case that strapped to his tank bag. He had a mobile hotspot, 2 backup batteries, and 3 different tracking applications running simultaneously. The girl's signal was a blinking dot on his screen, moving steadily northeast. He would not lose it. He had built these systems himself over 3 years of quiet work, assembling tools and databases and access points that existed in a gray area between legal and necessary. Tonight they would prove their worth, or they would prove nothing at all. Forge kept the phone to his ear. His voice shifted back to soft. You hear all that he said to Ren. 1 tap. That is 510 motorcycles getting ready to come find you. You hold on, you stay smart, you stay quiet. We are coming. And then he heard something that made his chest tighten. Something so quiet he almost missed it under the sound of men preparing to ride and engines warming and the organized thunder of 510 motorcycles being brought to life. Ren had worked the duct tape loose, not all the way, just enough. She had been working at it with her jaw and her tongue for the last several minutes, pushing against the adhesive with a persistence that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with the kind of stubbornness that gets passed from mother to daughter in families where giving up is not in the vocabulary. She had created a gap, small, maybe half an inch, enough to push a whisper through. Thank you. Her voice was small and cracked and barely louder than the sound of her own breathing. It carried the weight of 2 hours of absolute terror, 2 hours of darkness and plastic cutting into skin and men discussing her price. And it carried something else, something that sounded like a girl who had spent her whole life learning to take care of herself, finally allowing herself to believe that someone else was going to show up. Forge closed his eyes. Behind the lids in the private darkness that belonged only to him, he saw Kira, 14 years old, laughing about white shoes, walking into a parking lot and not walking out. He saw every year he had spent looking, every year he had spent failing. And he saw this girl, this stranger, this child who had called him by accident and given him something that 15 years of searching had not produced. When he opened his eyes again, they had the temperature of deep water in December. You do not thank me yet, he said quietly. You thank me when you are home. Outside the parking lot of the Iron Saints clubhouse was transforming. 510 motorcycles lined up in rows, chrome catching the desert sunset, engines cold but ready, 510 men pulling on helmets and gloves, checking mirrors, forming up in columns with the wordless precision of people who had ridden together so long they communicated in a language that had nothing to do with words. Spark appeared at Forge's shoulder. I have got her route locked. She is 22 minutes ahead of us. They are maintaining highway speed. If we push it, we can close that gap to 10. Then we push it. Forge walked toward his bike. A 2018 Road King with matte black paint and a skull on the front fender. Its body scarred and road-worn as its rider. He pulled on his gloves. The leather was stiff from years of gripping handlebars in wind and weather, and the kind of rides that start before dawn and do not end until something gets resolved or someone gets carried home. Behind him, engines began to turn over. 1, then another, then 10, then 50, then 100. The sound built in layers, each engine adding its voice to a chorus that grew from a rumble to a roar to something that transcended sound and became a physical force. The kind of vibration you feel in your molars and your sternum and the marrow of your bones. Windows in nearby buildings trembled in their frames. A dog 3 blocks away began barking and did not stop. Car alarms in the adjacent lot triggered one after another like a chain of firecrackers. The earth itself seemed to register the event as if 510 engines turning over simultaneously was the kind of thing the ground pays attention to. Spark had mounted his bike near the front of the formation. His laptop was secured in a waterproof case strapped to his tank bag. His phone served as a mobile hotspot. On the screen, a single blinking dot moved steadily northeast along Route 95. Ren's signal. He would watch it the way a lighthouse watches a ship in a storm. Constant, unblinking, unwilling to look away. Forge brought the phone to his ear one final time before they rode. Ren, 1 tap. I'm about to get on my bike. I am going to put you on speaker so I can still hear you. Do not hang up. Whatever happens, do not hang up. 1 tap. He switched to speaker. tucked the phone into his vest pocket close to his chest where he could hear her breathing. Then he turned his key. The Road King's engine barked to life. A deep, authoritative sound that joined the chorus building around him. 510 voices all singing the same note. Forge pulled out of the lot first. He always went first. That was not a rule. That was a principle. You do not send men where you are not willing to go yourself. Behind him, headlights ignited in sequence. A river of white light stretching back as far as the eye could follow. They rolled onto Boulder Highway heading northeast. A column of chrome and leather and absolute purpose moving through the October dusk like something elemental. Something that had been summoned from the deep bedrock of a code that most people had forgotten existed. A code that said when someone calls for help, you answer. When a child is in danger, you ride. When the system is too slow and the darkness is too fast, you become the thing that the darkness did not expect to meet on the road tonight. Drivers on the highway pulled to the shoulder. Some filmed on their phones, some stared. A highway patrol officer sitting in his cruiser at the Route 95 interchange watched the column approaching and reached for his radio. Dispatch, I have a motorcycle convoy on Route 95. Large convoy. How large? The officer watched them pass, counted for 10 seconds, 20, 30. The column showed no sign of ending. Dispatch, he said slowly, I count over 500 bikes, military formation. They are moving with purpose. Should we stop them? The officer watched the taillights stretching into the distance, red dots disappearing into the darkening sky. Something in his gut, something that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with instinct, told him no. Negative, he said. Let them go. In the trunk of a gray Honda Accord 22 minutes ahead, Wren Calloway heard the sound. It came through the phone speaker pressed against her chest. Distant but growing. A low rolling thunder that did not sound like thunder at all. It sounded like 510 engines running at speed. It sounded like a promise being kept. She pressed the phone tighter against her ribcage and closed her eyes and held onto that sound the way a drowning person holds onto a rope thrown from a shore they cannot see, but know is there. And on Route 95, cutting through the Nevada desert in the last light of an October sunset, 510 motorcycles rode north. Their headlights made a river of fire on the highway. Their engines made the air vibrate for miles in every direction. Their riders sat low and steady in their saddles with the focus of men who had somewhere to be and someone to find, and absolutely nothing in this world that was going to stop them from getting there. Forge rode at the front, the wind hit his face and the road disappeared under his wheels, and the phone in his vest pocket carried the faint sound of a 14-year-old girl breathing in the dark. The desert spread out on both sides of the highway, empty, vast. The kind of landscape that reminds you how small you are and how large the darkness is. He thought about Kira, thought about a phone call about blue shoes and white shoes that he had replayed 10,000 times in the theater of his memory until the sound of her laugh was both the clearest and the most painful thing he carried. Thought about every door he had knocked on and every lead he had followed and every dead end he had hit in 15 years of looking for a girl who never came home. He thought about the name on the bar napkin. Oleg. 4 letters that had haunted him for a decade and a half. A ghost that the system had decided was not worth chasing. A name that had survived in the back of his mind like an ember in ash waiting for oxygen. A 14-year-old girl in a trunk had just given it oxygen. Forge did not believe in coincidence, did not believe in luck, did not believe in the kind of clean, easy narratives that made people feel comfortable about the world. But he believed in this. He believed that when a terrified child punches 9 random numbers into a cracked phone in the dark, and those numbers reach a man who has been waiting 15 years for exactly this call, that is not an accident. That is something else. Something older and heavier and more deliberate than chance. Behind him, 510 headlights burned through the October dusk. 510 engines sang in unison. 510 men rode toward a warehouse in the desert where men with briefcases were waiting to buy a girl, and none of them knew yet that the girl they were buying had already begun to dismantle their operation from the inside of a locked trunk with nothing but a cracked phone and a memory sharp enough to cut glass. And he understood something with the cold, absolute clarity of a man who has waited a very long time for a moment he was not sure would ever arrive. This was not a rescue. This was a reckoning. And it had started with a phone call from a 14-year-old girl who refused to be cargo. Gregor Dosick had been in the business of moving merchandise for 12 years. He had transported everything from stolen electronics to pharmaceutical narcotics to people who did not want to be transported. He had crossed state lines with cargo that would have earned him 20 years federal if he had been caught. He had never been caught, not once. He was careful, methodical. He followed protocols. He did not take unnecessary risks. He did not speed. He did not run red lights. He did not attract attention. The Honda needed fuel. Gregor had planned for this. A gas station on Route 95, 40 miles northeast of Henderson, the kind of place that served truckers and insomniacs and nobody who paid attention to license plates. He pulled and killed the engine and told Vadim to stay with the car. The whole stop would take 90 seconds. Routine. Controlled. The way everything in Gregor's operation was controlled. He did not know that the girl in his trunk was using those 90 seconds to change the course of his life. When he pulled back onto the highway, the needle climbing towards 70, everything seemed normal. The road was empty, the night was dark, the cargo was silent. Gregor allowed himself the closest thing to relaxation that a man in his profession ever achieved. Vadim scrolled through his phone. The radio played something low and forgettable. Then the sound started. A low vibration that Gregor initially dismissed as road noise. Route 95 northeast of Las Vegas was not known for smooth pavement, and the Honda suspension was old enough to amplify every imperfection in the asphalt. But the sound was not fading. It was building, growing, a bass frequency that he felt in his sternum before he heard it with his ears. Vadim noticed it too. He stopped scrolling and sat up straighter, his head tilted to one side like a dog catching a frequency that humans were not supposed to detect. "You hear that," Vadim said. "Road noise," Gregor said, but his hands had tightened on the steering wheel. "Road noise does not get louder." Vadim twisted in his seat and looked through the rear window into the darkness behind them. The highway stretched back into empty October night. No headlights, no traffic, just darkness and the broken white center line disappearing into shadow. Except way back. Maybe 5 miles, maybe more. There was a glow on the horizon, faint, diffuse, like dawn trying to happen in the wrong direction and at the wrong time. "What is that?" Vadim said. "I do not know. It is following us." "It is not following us. It is just traffic." "That is not traffic." Gregor pressed the accelerator. The Honda speedometer climbed from 70 to 80. The glow behind them stayed exactly the same distance back, not gaining, not falling behind, just there. Constant, patient. In the trunk, Wren felt the car accelerate. The change in speed pressed her against the spare tire and made the road noise climb from a hum to a whine. The phone was still in her hand, pressed against her chest. Forge's voice coming through the speaker in low, steady reassurances that she held onto like a rope in deep water. "Wren, you still with me?" She tapped once. "Good. Real good. We are getting close now. Maybe 15 minutes behind you. I need you to stay quiet. Stay low. When we get there, when you hear us arrive, you stay in that trunk until you hear my voice. Nobody else's. Just mine. You understand?" One tap. "That is my girl." Wren's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. It had been beating so hard for so long that she had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound if it goes on long enough. But now it was doing something different. Not quite hope, not quite relief. Something between the two that felt dangerous to trust but impossible to ignore. She could hear them talking in the front seat. Gregor and Vadim. Their voices had changed. The casual boredom that had carried them through the first hour of driving was gone. There was tension now. Worry. Something close to fear, but not quite willing to admit it yet. Good, she thought. Let them be scared. Let them feel what I felt. The thought surprised her. Not its content, but its temperature. It was cold, clear. The thought of someone who had passed through terror and come out the other side into a place where fear had been replaced by something harder and more useful. Wren did not have a name for it yet. She would later. Her therapist would call it survival response. Her mother would call it strength. Forge would call it exactly what it was. The thing that separates people who endure from people who do not. The car took an exit. Ren felt the turn, felt the deceleration, felt the road surface change from smooth highway to something rougher. The Honda slowed, turned again. She heard the crunch of gravel under tires, and then the car stopped. Through the thin wall of the trunk, she heard Gregor's door open. Heard his footsteps on pavement, heard the mechanical thunk of a fuel pump being lifted from its cradle. Gas station. They were stopping for fuel. Ren's mind moved fast, faster than it had ever moved in 14 years of living. She had her student ID in her jacket pocket. Henderson High School. Her photograph, her name. She had felt its hard plastic edge against her hip for the past hour and had been saving it the way a chess player saves a piece for the right moment. This was the right moment. She twisted her body. The zip ties bit deeper into her wrists, and she felt fresh warmth that was almost certainly blood this time, but she kept twisting. Her bound hands found the pocket. Her fingers, numb and swollen, closed around the card and pulled it free. Then she reached toward the back of the trunk near the wheel well where she had felt a rough patch earlier. A rust hole. Small. Maybe the size of a quarter, not big enough to see through, but big enough to push something through. She worked the card through the hole, felt it catch on the edge, pushed harder, felt it slip free and fall. It landed face up on the gravel beneath the car. Her photo looking up at fluorescent lights. Her name printed in block letters. Ren Calloway. Henderson High School. A breadcrumb left in the dark by a girl who understood that rescue required evidence, and evidence required someone willing to leave pieces of themselves behind. The fuel pump clicked. Gregor's footsteps returned. His door closed. The engine started. The Honda pulled away, and the student ID stayed there on the gravel, small and plastic, and worth more than the men in the front seat would ever understand. 90 seconds later, a Road King with matte black paint and a skull on the front fender rolled into that same gas station. The rider did not stop for fuel. He pulled to the edge of the lot and killed his engine and swept a flashlight across the ground in a slow, methodical pattern. The kind of search pattern you learn from experience. The kind that does not miss things. The beam caught something small and rectangular in plastic. He picked it up, looked at the photo, the name. A 14-year-old girl with dark hair and serious eyes staring up at him from a school identification card that had no business being on the ground at a gas station 40 miles from Henderson. He pressed his radio. Forge. I got confirmation. Forge's voice came back through every radio in the convoy simultaneously. Talk to me. Student ID. Henderson High School. Ren Calloway. 14 years old. Silence on the radio. The kind of silence that carries weight. She was here, boss. She is leaving breadcrumbs. Forge's response was quiet and controlled and carried a finality that every man in the convoy understood as an absolute commitment from which there would be no retreat. Then we follow them all the way to hell if we have to. Tell the chapters. Nobody stops. Nobody breaks formation. We ride until we find her. The convoy did not slow. It accelerated. And 40 miles ahead in the driver's seat of a gray Honda Accord, Gregor glanced in his rearview mirror and frowned. The glow on the horizon was brighter now. Closer. He could almost make out individual points of light within it, like stars that had fallen to earth and were rolling toward him in formation. He told himself it was nothing. Told himself it was traffic. Told himself there was no possible way anyone knew where they were or where they were going. He was wrong about all three. In the trunk, Ren heard Gregor's phone ring. A different phone, not the one Vadim had been using earlier. This one had a sharp electronic tone that cut through the road noise in the trunk's metal walls. She heard Gregor answer, heard his voice change. The tension that had been building in his speech suddenly tightened into something closer to deference. Whoever was on the other end of that call was someone Gregor was afraid of. She pressed her ear against the back seat wall and listened. Gregor spoke mostly in short responses. Yes. Understood. When? Why? His English was clipped and careful the way people speak when they are receiving orders they do not want to question. But between his responses, she caught fragments of the voice on the other end, tinny and compressed through the phone's speaker, but audible. Male. Authoritative. Speaking in accented English that was smoother than Gregor's more practiced. The accent of someone who had been in the country longer and had worked harder to file down the edges of their native tongue. Change of location, not building 2, building 6, North entrance. There has been activity on the access road near Building 2. Too many vehicles. We are not taking risks tonight. Grigor said something she could not hear clearly. Then the voice continued. 4 of our people will be there instead of 2. Oleg wants extra security after what happened in Tucson last month. Full transfer. Full payment on site. No delays. The call ended. Grigor said something to Vadim in a language she did not understand. Russian, probably. Vadim responded with a tone that sounded like a question. Gregor's answer was short. Final. The car did not change speed, but Ren felt something shift in the air. The plan had changed. The destination had changed. Building 6, not Building 2. Ren's stomach dropped. She had given Forge Building 2. She had tapped out those letters one by one in the dark with her numb fingers and her cracked phone and her absolute certainty that the information was right. And it had been right. 20 minutes ago, it had been right. Now it was wrong. And Forge and 510 men on motorcycles were riding toward the wrong building at 80 miles an hour in the dark, and every mile they covered was a mile in the wrong direction. If they arrived at Building 2, they would find an empty warehouse, an empty lot. No Honda, no SUVs, no men with briefcases. And somewhere in the time it took them to realize the mistake and regroup and find Building 6, the transaction would be complete. She would be transferred to a different vehicle, driven to a different location, sold to people whose names she did not know in a place she would never be found. The 11 minutes between now and arrival was the margin between rescue and disappearance. And the only person who knew the margin had changed was a 14-year-old girl lying in a trunk. Her hand tightened around the phone. The battery indicator, the last time she had been able to limit the screen by tilting it at an angle and catching a sliver of light through the trunk seam, had shown 12%. 12% was not much. 12% was a margin so thin that every second of screen time, every minute of active call, every pulse of signal searching for a cell tower ate into it like acid eating through metal. She had a choice. The kind of choice that should not be made by a 14-year-old girl with zip ties on her wrists and blood on her hands and 2 hours of terror sitting on her chest. But nobody else was going to make it for her. She could keep the call with Forge active, keep hearing his voice, keep holding on to the steady reassurance of a man who had promised to come for her and was keeping that promise at 70 miles an hour in the dark. The connection was her lifeline, her proof that she was not alone. Cutting it felt like stepping off a ledge. Or she could hang up, save the battery. Wait, listen to whatever else Gregor and Vadim said in the front seat. Gather the information that could mean the difference between 510 men arriving at the right building or the wrong one, between rescue and disaster. Ren Calloway was 14 years old. She had learned to cook at 9, learned to do laundry at 10, learned to walk home alone at 11, learned that the world was not going to take care of her, and that waiting for someone else to make the hard decisions was how you ended up depending on luck instead of preparation. She made her choice. She pressed the phone against the gap in the duct tape over her mouth and whispered. Her voice was barely a breath, a sound so small it could have been the rustle of fabric or the hiss of a tire on asphalt. Forge. They changed the plan. New building. I need to listen. I am going to hang up and call you back. Trust me. The silence on the other end lasted 2 full seconds. 2 seconds that felt like 2 hours. She could almost hear him fighting against every instinct he had, fighting against the voice in his head that said, do not let go of this line. Do not lose her. Do not let the darkness swallow the only thread connecting you to a child who needs you. Then his voice came back, quiet, controlled, but carrying an undertone of something that sounded very much like a man watching someone walk into a burning building and understanding that he cannot stop them and should not try. Okay, you call me back, you hear me. You call me back the second you have what you need. I will be right here. This phone will not leave my hand. One tap, then silence. She ended the call. The screen went dark. The trunk went darker. The sound of Forge's breathing, the sound that had been her anchor for the past hour, disappeared. And Ren Calloway was alone again. Alone in the dark, in a trunk, in a car, driven by men who had paid $15,000 for her and were delivering her to men who would pay more. She pressed her ear against the seat back and listened with everything she had. Gregor was talking to Vadim. In English now. Perhaps because the details mattered too much for shortcuts. Building 6, north entrance. The old textile factory at the end of the road? Why the change? Someone saw vehicles near Building 2. Could be nothing. Could be police. Oleg does not take chances, and the extra men, security, 4 total, armed. They will have the money in the transport vehicle. We pull in, make the exchange, and leave. 30 minutes. Ren memorized it. Building 6, north entrance. 4 men, armed. 30 minutes. She added it to the inventory in her head, the catalog of details she had been building since the moment the van door slid open and the world changed. She ran through the complete list to make sure nothing had been lost. Gregor Dasek, shaved head, tattoo on wrist, Cyrillic letters, drives stolen Honda Accord, Nevada plates starting 7KR, 12 years in the business, connected to Oleg. Vadim Marin, late 20s, dark hair gelled back, Eastern European accent, carries a phone in his jacket pocket. Discussed pricing, 15,000, 20 if undamaged. Oleg, name spoken with deference, runs the network. Operations in Nevada, California, Arizona. Pipeline. 11 more girls scheduled for December. Storage facility with keypad entry. Gate code punched in by Gregor. Location unknown, but reachable from Henderson in 20 minutes heading northeast. Original destination. Apex Industrial Complex. Building 2. East entrance. New destination. Apex Industrial Complex. Building 6. North entrance. Old textile factory. 4 armed men waiting. Money on site. Transport vehicle on site. She held it all. Every detail. Every name. Every number. She held it the way her mother held the household budget, with the grim precision of someone who knew that a single mistake meant the difference between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. 3 minutes had passed since she ended the call. Her phone showed 8% battery. She pressed the call button. It rang once. Forge answered before the first ring finished. "Talk to me," Wren whispered, each word carefully shaped. Each syllable pushed it through the gap in the duct tape with the precision of someone posting letters through a slot that was almost too narrow. Building 6, not 2. 6, north entrance. 4 men waiting, not 2. Yeshrid, 30 minutes from now. She heard Forge exhale, a sound that carried the weight of a man who had just been told that the road he was racing down at 80 miles an hour led to the wrong door, and that the girl in the trunk had just drawn him a new map. Forge's voice came through the speaker. Not to her, to the convoy. All units, change of target. Building 6, repeat. Building 6, north entrance. Adjust formation for north approach. Reno chapter swing wide east. Sacramento, hold your flank. Vegas and mother chapter. Straight up the access road. Converge on my signal. Radio chatter erupted. Brief, professional. Road captains acknowledging the change, adjusting routes, recalculating approach angles. 510 motorcycles on a desert highway, shifting direction like a school of fish responding to a current, change fluid and instant and unified. Sparks' voice cut through the chatter. Boss, if they move to Building 6, the north entrance has 2 vehicle bays and a loading dock. Only 1 access road in from the north. But there is a gap in the perimeter fence on the east side and open desert on the west. 3-point approach is still viable. Better, actually. Building 6 is more isolated. Harder for them to run. Copy that, Forge said. Then quieter. Ren. 1 tap. You just saved this whole operation. You know that. 1 tap. How much battery? She checked. The number made her stomach tighten. She tapped. 7. 7%. Okay. Stay on the line. Keep the phone against your chest. Do not make a sound. We are 12 minutes out. Can you hold on for 12 minutes? 1 tap. Forge's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. Almost the kind of thing a man says to himself when he is making a promise he is not sure the universe will let him keep. 12 minutes, Ren. That is all. You hang on for 12 more minutes and then you are going home. She pressed the phone against her rib cage, felt its warmth against her skin, through the fabric of her shirt. 7%. 12 minutes. The math was tight. The math was the kind of thing you did not look at too closely, because looking too closely revealed how thin the margin was and how many things could go wrong in the space between now and safe. Outside the trunk, the Nevada desert slid past in the darkness. The Honda had turned off Route 95 and was now on a two-lane road that wound through what used to be an industrial park before the economy collapsed and took the businesses with it. Warehouses stood on both sides of the road in various states of decay. Some were just concrete shells with empty window frames that stared at the road like blind eyes. Others still had walls and roofs, but looked like they were trying to decide whether to keep standing or surrender to gravity and time. Grigor drove with both hands on the wheel. His knuckles were pale. The rearview mirror showed him things he did not want to see. The glow behind them was not a glow anymore. It was a wall of light. Individual headlights now visible within the mass. Hundreds of them, stretching across the width of the road and spilling onto the shoulders like a flood that had decided the banks of the river were suggestions rather than boundaries. "What the hell?" Vadim whispered. He had turned fully around in his seat and was staring through the rear window with an expression that Gregor had never seen on his face before. Not surprise, not confusion, fear, the real kind, the kind that starts in the gut and climbs. "Who are they?" Vadim said. "I do not know." "Police. Police do not ride motorcycles in formation like that." "Then who?" Gregor did not answer. He was too busy trying to keep the Honda on a road that was fighting him at every turn. Potholes appeared in the headlights like craters. The asphalt was crumbling at the edges where desert sand had been slowly reclaiming the road for years. He swerved around a pothole the size of a manhole cover, and the car's rear end fishtailed on loose gravel before the tires found purchase again. His foot pressed the accelerator harder. 85, 90. The Honda was not built for this. It started shaking. The steering wheel vibrated in his hands and the dashboard rattled, and the whole vehicle felt like it was negotiating with its own structural integrity about how much longer it could hold together. The lights behind them did not fall back. They grew brighter, closer. The sound was no longer a distant vibration. It was a presence, a wall of bass frequency noise that pressed against the rear window and filled the interior of the car and made the rearview mirror tremble in its housing. "Who are they?" Vadim said again. His voice had climbed half an octave. Grigor did not answer because he did not have an answer, and because the part of his brain that specialized in answers was fully occupied with the task of keeping a stolen Honda Accord on a disintegrating road at 90 miles per hour with something vast and loud and inexplicable closing in behind him. The car hit a pothole. The suspension bottomed out with a sound like a fist hitting a table. Something in the trunk made a thudding noise. In the trunk, Ren had been thrown against the wheel well. The impact knocked the air from her lungs and sent a spike of pain through her shoulder where it hit the jack handle. The phone slipped from her grip and skittered across the trunk floor into the darkness near the taillight housing. "No, no, no, no." She twisted, fingers searching. The trunk was small, but in the dark it felt enormous. Her bound hands swept across carpet and metal and the rough surface of the spare tire and the damp fabric of the old blankets. Nothing. The phone was gone, lost in the black. She forced herself to stop, forced her breathing to slow, forced the panic back down into the place where she kept it locked and controlled. She closed her eyes even though they were already useless in the darkness, and she listened. Listened for the faint electronic hum of an active call. Listened for the whisper of Forge's voice coming from wherever the phone had landed. There, left side, near the taillight, a faint green glow leaking through a crack in the phone's shattered screen. She twisted her whole body toward it. The zip ties screamed against her wrists. She felt skin break, felt the warm, wet slide of blood on her fingers. She did not care. She reached, and her fingertips brushed the edge of the phone case, and she pulled it back to her chest and held it there with both hands pressed flat against her sternum like a patient holding their own heart in place. Forge's voice. Urgent. "Ren. Ren, you okay? Talk to me. Tap. Something. Anything." She tapped once. It was weaker than before. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely control them. "We saw that. We saw the car swerve. Stay low. We are almost there." Building 6 appeared ahead. Ren could not see it, but she felt the car slow, felt it turn, felt the tires crunch on a different surface, gravel and broken asphalt in the gritty texture of concrete dust. Grigor was talking fast now. Vadim was responding in single words that sounded like affirmatives. The car stopped, engine off, doors open, footsteps on gravel, and voices, new voices, deeper, more authoritative. Speaking in accented English that carried the clipped efficiency of people conducting a transaction they had conducted many times before. "You are late," one of the new voices said. "We had complications," Gregor said. "Where is the merchandise?" "In the trunk. But we need to move now. There is something behind us on the road. Money first. Listen to me. There is something." The voice cut him off with the flat authority of someone who was not accustomed to being argued with. Money first. Ren heard the trunk latch click, felt the lid lift. Cold night air rushed in carrying the smell of desert sage and motor oil and exhaust. Lots of exhaust. 4 vehicles at least. She kept her eyes shut against the sudden wash of artificial light. A flashlight beam, harsh and white, and aimed directly at her face. She opened her eyes, squinted, and saw the man holding the flashlight. Large, broad across the shoulders, Eastern European features. A face that contained no mercy and no curiosity, and no recognition that the thing in the trunk was a person rather than a product. Behind him stood 3 more men. One held a metal briefcase. One had his hand inside his jacket in the universal posture of someone touching a weapon they were ready to use. The third stood slightly apart, scanning the road they had come in on with the restless attention of a sentry who sensed something in the air, but could not yet identify it. "Get her out," the man with the flashlight said. Hands reached for her, large hands, rough. They grabbed the front of her jacket and started to pull her upright. Ren's body left the trunk floor. Her feet scraped against the bumper. The night air hit her skin, and she shivered not from cold, but from the sudden, overwhelming reality of being touched by strangers who intended to carry her into a building from which she would not emerge as herself. She had 3% battery left. The phone was clutched against her chest under her jacket. The call was still active. Forge could hear everything. And that is when the horizon exploded. Not gradually, not piece by piece, not the slow brightening of an approaching dawn. All at once, as if someone had thrown a master switch and turned midnight into noon. Headlights, hundreds of them, cresting the small rise at the entrance to the industrial park from the north and pouring down the access road like a river that had broken through a dam. A second later, more lights, from the east, through the gap in the perimeter fence that Spark had identified from satellite imagery. A second column of motorcycles pouring through the opening in a stream of chrome and leather. And from the west, out of what had looked like empty desert, a third wave materializing from the darkness like something that had been waiting there all along. Patient, ready, timing its entrance for maximum effect. 3 directions, 3 waves, converging on Building 6 like the fingers of a hand closing into a fist. The timing was exact, not approximate, not close enough. Exact. 3 columns of motorcycles arriving at the same lot at the same second from 3 different compass points, the product of coordination that had been built over decades of riding together and refined in circumstances that most civilians would never know about and would not believe if they were told. It was the kind of precision that comes from trust, from 510 men who knew each other's riding rhythms and reaction times in the exact width of space each bike needed in formation, from road captains who had run approaches like this before and understood that timing was not a suggestion, but a weapon. And it was precise because of something else. Because a girl in a trunk had given them the right building, the right entrance, the right number of hostiles. Without her information, they would have been 12 minutes late to an empty parking lot at Building 2, cursing the darkness and wondering where the Honda had gone. Instead, they were here, right now, right on time. The sound hit a second after the light. 510 engines at full throat. A wall of sound that was not sound anymore, but a physical force. Something you felt in your eardrums, in your rib cage, and the fillings in your teeth. The ground beneath the warehouse vibrated like a drum head struck by a mallet the size of a building. Gravel danced on the concrete. The corrugated metal walls of Building 6 hummed a deep resonant note like the lowest string on an instrument that had never been built. The man holding Ren dropped her. His hands released her jacket, and she fell back against the bumper of the Honda, catching herself on the edge of the trunk. The man with the briefcase took 3 stumbling steps backward. His face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. The sentry reached inside his jacket and then froze because he could see now what was coming toward him, and his hand understood before his brain did that the weapon inside his jacket was not going to help him. Vadim said something that might have been a prayer, or might have been a curse, or might have been both. He was already backing away from the car with his hands rising toward his shoulders. And Gregor Dasik, 12 years of experience, 12 years of crossing state lines with cargo that should have put him in prison, 12 years of being careful and methodical and never getting caught. Gregor sat frozen in the driver's seat with his hands still on the steering wheel and watched in the rearview mirror as 510 headlights filled his entire field of vision and understood with perfect clarity that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Not the kidnapping, not the trafficking. Those were business decisions, cold equations, supply meeting demand. No, his error was simpler and more fundamental than that. He had assumed the girl was alone. The motorcycles did not slow down. They poured into the lot from all three directions simultaneously. They surrounded Building 6 in a perfect circle, a ring of steel and leather and chrome that closed with the precision of a trap and had been designed by someone who understood that escape routes are only useful if your enemy does not know about them. Cutter had coordinated the three-point approach from the east flank, his radio calls timed to the second, his decades of tactical experience compressed into a formation that left no gap wider than a motorcycle. Engines cut out in sequence, not all at once, in a wave that started at the front and rolled backward. The sound did not disappear, it transformed. 510 men dismounting, boots hitting gravel, leather creaking. The mechanical symphony of kickstands being deployed in unison. And then silence. Perfect. Total. Absolute. The kind of silence that happens right before everything changes. The kind of silence that is not empty but full. Full of intent and purpose in the coiled potential energy of 510 men standing in a circle around four criminals in a stolen car with a 14-year-old girl leaning against its open trunk. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the desert sage and the distant metallic ping of cooling motorcycle engines, settling after a run at speed. The circle was 3 rows deep. The men stood shoulder to shoulder, their Iron Saints patches catching the headlights in flashes of embroidered color. Their faces were hard and patient and absolutely still. They were not shouting, they were not threatening, they were not posturing. They were just there, present. 510 men who had ridden 40 miles through the Nevada desert because a 14-year-old girl had called a number by accident, and the man who answered had said, "We are coming," and had meant it. Grigor looked at the circle, looked at the faces, looked at the vests, in the patches, in the controlled stillness of men who were waiting for a signal from someone whose authority they recognized without question. And Gregor felt something he had not felt since childhood, something he had spent 12 years building walls against. Something that his career of violence and profit and calculated cruelty had taught him to treat as weakness. Fear. Pure. Absolute. The kind of fear that a predator feels when it realizes too late that it has wandered into the territory of something larger and more dangerous and more patient than itself. A single figure stepped forward from the front of the formation. Massive, iron gray hair catching the light. A face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who was angry at the stone. He walked toward the Honda with measured steps. Not hurrying, not posturing, just walking. With the calm, unhurried gait of a man who had all the time in the world because the thing he had come for was right in front of him and nothing was going to take it away. He was 20 feet from the car, then 10, then 5. He stopped at the driver's side window and looked down at Gregor with eyes that carried the temperature of permafrost. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The desert wind pushed a tumbleweed across the lot behind the formation, and nobody looked at it because nobody was looking at anything except the massive man standing beside the Honda and the man inside it who had just realized that the mathematics of his life had fundamentally changed. Then Forge spoke. His voice was quiet, conversational. The kind of tone someone uses when discussing the weather or asking for the time. "You have something that does not belong to you," he said. Gregor's mouth opened. No sound came out. I am going to give you exactly 5 seconds to step out of that vehicle. If you are still in the driver's seat when I finish counting, my brothers behind me are going to help you out. And they are not as patient as I am. He paused. Let the silence do its work. 1. Gregor's hand fumbled for the door handle. 2. The door would not open. Child lock. He had engaged the child lock. 3. Vadim was already out of the passenger side, hands raised, backing away from the car with the desperate backward shuffle of someone retreating from a cliff edge. 4. Gregor found the unlock button, pressed it, the door opened. 5. He stumbled out of the car with his hands up and his heel catching on gravel, and his balance failing and his dignity gone, and his 12 years of never getting caught collapsing around him like a building that had been condemned years ago and was finally getting around to falling down. Forge watched him with the clinical interest of someone observing an insect under glass. Then he turned away from Gregor, dismissed him, erased him from the immediate priority list with a turn of his shoulders that said, "You are no longer the most important thing in this lot." He walked to the back of the Honda, to the open trunk, to the girl. Ren was leaning against the bumper. Her wrists were bloody from the zip ties. Her face was streaked with tears and grime, and the adhesive residue from duct tape she had worked halfway loose through 2 hours of patient jaw movement. Her jacket was torn where the man had grabbed it. Her hair was matted against her forehead. She was shaking, but her eyes were open, and in them, mixed with the terror and the exhaustion and the aftermath of the worst night of her life, there was something else. Forge looked down at her, and his expression changed. The granite softened. Something human appeared beneath the surface. Something old and wounded and full of a tenderness that did not match the scars on his face, or the size of his hands, or the reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. He pulled a knife from his belt. Ren flinched. "Easy," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I am just cutting the ties." He sliced through the zip ties with one clean motion. The plastic fell away from her wrists. The sudden release of pressure was almost more painful than the binding had been. Blood rushed back into her fingers, and they burned and tingled, and she gasped. Forge folded the knife, put it away. Then he reached down, impossibly gentle for hands that size, and carefully peeled the duct tape from her mouth. Slowly, the way you remove a bandage from a wound you do not want to disturb. Ren took her first unrestricted breath in 2 hours. It came in as a sob, deep and ragged, and carrying the weight of everything she had held inside since the van door opened, and the hands grabbed her, and the world went dark. "Hey," Forge said. His voice was barely a murmur. "You are okay now. I am Forge. We talked on the phone. Remember?" Ren nodded. Tears were running down her face, hot and fast and unstoppable. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs would not cooperate. She had been in the trunk too long. Everything was numb and disconnected, her body a collection of parts that had forgotten how to work together. Forge did not hesitate. He reached into the trunk and lifted her out with the ease of someone picking up something precious and fragile and irreplaceable. Set her on her feet, kept one hand on her shoulder to steady her. The hand covered her entire shoulder. It was warm and heavy, and it did not shake. "You did real good, Ren." He said it quietly enough that only she could hear. "You stayed smart. You stayed brave. You changed the target when they changed the building. You got yourself out." Ren looked past him, at the 510 men standing in perfect silence, at the ring of motorcycles, at the wall of leather and chrome and controlled power that had materialized out of the desert night because she had pressed 9 random numbers on a cracked phone in the dark. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would." Forge pulled off his vest. The leather was worn soft from decades of desert highways and mountain passes, and the kind of miles that leave marks on both the leather and the man wearing it. The Iron Saints patches gleamed in the headlight wash. He draped it over Ren's shoulders. It swallowed her, hung to mid-thigh. Smelled like leather and engine oil and the particular combination of road dust and determination that accumulates on a man who has spent his life riding toward things that other people ride away from. "You are safe now," he said. "You hear me? It is over." Ren pulled the vest tight around herself. It was warm, warm from his body heat and warm from something else. Something that felt like the opposite of the trunk, the opposite of the dark, the opposite of being cargo. She looked up at the massive man who had answered a random phone call from a stranger and brought 510 people across the desert to keep a promise. Thank you, she said. Forge looked down at her. Something in his face cracked. Just for a second. A fissure in the granite that showed the raw stone underneath. Then it was gone. Not yet, he said. His voice was low and final. You are not home yet. Save it for when you are standing in your own kitchen with your mother's arms around you. Then you can thank me all you want. He turned to face the lot. Grigor was on his knees in the gravel. Vadim was beside him. The four men from the vehicles were already on the ground with their hands behind their heads. They had understood the mathematics faster than Gregor had looked at 510 men in a circle around them, and done the only calculation that made sense. And in the distance, faint but growing, the sound of sirens. Red and blue lights painting the desert sky in alternating pulses. The system arriving. Late as always, but arriving. Ren stood inside the circle of motorcycles with a dead man's vest on her shoulders and the blood drying on her wrists and a phone with 2% battery clutched against her chest. She had entered a trunk as a girl who had been taken. She was standing in this lot as something else. Something she did not have a name for yet, but could feel assembling itself inside her like a structure being built from materials that had not existed before tonight. She looked at Gregor on his knees, at the men who had discussed her price, at the building where they had planned to sell her. And she made a decision that would change everything that happened next. The red and blue lights painted the warehouse lot in alternating colors. Crimson, then sapphire, then crimson again. A slow strobe that turned 510 faces into a gallery of shadows and hard angles. The police cruiser rolled to a stop at the entrance to the lot. Just one. A single Henderson PD patrol car with two officers inside looking at a scene that made absolutely no sense according to any protocol call they had ever been trained for. Forge did not turn to look at them. His eyes stayed on the lot, on the men on their knees, on the girl standing beside the Honda with his vest draped over her shoulders. He held up one hand, palm flat. The gesture rippled outward through the formation the way a stone's impact ripples across water. Nobody moves, he said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed by 510 people simultaneously. The circle went still, not tense, not posed. Still in the way that a mountain is still. Present and immovable and not going anywhere. The patrol car doors opened. Two officers stepped out. The driver was older, maybe 50, gray at his temples in the kind of posture that suggested 25 years on the mum and exactly zero illusions about human nature. His nameplate read Hargrove. He took in the scene with a slow, deliberate sweep that started at the ring of motorcycles and moved inward through the formation to the men on the ground and the vehicles in the open trunk of the Honda, and finally to the girl. His partner was younger, late 20s, nameplate reading Price. His hand rested on his service weapon, but he had not drawn it. Not yet. He was looking at the scene with the expression of someone who has opened a door expecting a closet and found an ocean. Hargrove's eye stopped on Ren. He had been a cop long enough to recognize what he was looking at. The specific combination of trauma and relief and exhaustion that came from surviving something that should have destroyed you. He had seen it on domestic violence victims, on assault survivors, on people pulled from car wrecks who could not believe they were still breathing. He knew what it looked like, and he knew that the girl standing in that lot with blood and mud on her wrists and a biker's vest on her shoulders was carrying the full weight of it. He approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. The body language of a man trying to de-escalate something he did not yet understand. I am Officer Hargrove, Henderson PD. Can someone tell me what is happening here? Forge turned to face him. Yeah. The movement was economical, no wasted motion. There is a 14-year-old girl who was kidnapped from Henderson 3 hours ago. His voice was level, factual. She is right here, unharmed. The men who took her are the ones on their knees. The men who are here to buy her are the ones next to the SUV. You will find zip ties, duct tape, and burner phones in both vehicles. You will also find, if you run the VIN on that Honda, that it was reported stolen 6 weeks ago from a rental lot in Reno. Hargrove looked at Ren. That true sweetheart. These men take you. Ren nodded. She tried to speak, but the words caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, tangled in the residue of 2 hours of enforced silence. She managed 2 syllables. They did. Price had moved to the Honda. He was shining his flashlight into the trunk. He saw the zip ties on the floor, the duct tape, the phone with its shattered screen and its battery at 2%. The blood on the carpet where Ren's wrists had bled. His expression changed. The professional distance that they teach you at the academy cracked and something personal showed through. Jesus, he said quietly. Hargrove turned his attention back to Forge. And who are you? Someone who answered her phone call. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. The two men looked at each other. Hargrove had been doing this long enough to recognize when he was standing in the middle of something that did not fit into the neat categories of law enforcement procedure. He could see the girl was safe. He could see the suspects were contained. He could see that 500 witnesses with Iron Saints patches were watching him decide what happened next. He made a choice. The kind of choice that does not appear in any manual, but determines the outcome of more situations than all the manuals combine. Price, he said to his younger partner, call it in. Tell dispatch we need detectives, child services, and an evidence team at the Apex Industrial Complex. Building 6. Multiple suspects in custody related to a kidnapping. He paused. Tell them the victim is safe. Price moved back to the patrol car, radio in hand. His voice carried across the lot in fragments as he relayed the information. Kidnapping victim recovered. Multiple suspects. Requesting backup and investigative units. Hargrove looked at Forge. I am going to need statements. From her. From you. From anyone who witnessed what happened. She needs a hospital first, Forge said. And her parents. Agreed. But I need to know what happened here before this lot empties out and I am left with nothing but tire tracks and conflicting stories. Forge considered this. Nodded once. Sparky called without turning around. The young man with wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward from the second row of the formation. He was holding a laptop in one hand and a thumb drive in the other. He had been ready. Had been ready since they left the clubhouse. Give the officer everything Forge said. Spark walked up to Hargrove and held out the thumb drive. You want it digital or should I walk you through it? Hargrove looked at the drive, then at Spark. What is on this? Cell tower data, GPS tracking coordinates, traffic camera footage from 3 different intersections. A complete timeline of the victim's movement from the point of abduction to this location. Financial records linking the suspects to an individual known as Oleg, who operates a trafficking network spanning Nevada, California, and Arizona. Hargrove's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, and Spark continued adjusting his glasses wire transfer records and encrypted communications that connect the suspects in this lot to at least 11 other planned abductions scheduled for December. Different victims, different cities, same network. Who are you people? Hargrove said. Spark smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a 26-year-old who had spent his entire adult life building systems designed to find the things that other systems missed. Concerned citizens, he said. Hargrove took the thumb drive, put it in his pocket. He would look at it later. He would look at it, and it would keep him awake for 3 nights because the scope of what it contained was larger and darker and more organized than anything he had encountered in 25 years of police work in a city that thought it was safe. But right now, his priority was the girl. He turned to Ren. She was still standing beside the Honda, still wearing Forge's vest, still holding the dead phone against her chest. The paramedics had not arrived yet. The detectives had not arrived yet. The child services caseworker and the evidence technicians and the entire apparatus of the system were still 10 minutes away. And Ren was not waiting. She stepped forward, toward Hargrove, away from the Honda, away from the trunk. Each step was unsteady. Her legs were still half numb from 2 hours of confinement, and her balance was unreliable, and she swayed once, and Forge's hand came out to steady her, but she shook her head. A small, sharp motion that said, I need to do this myself. She stopped in front of Hargrove, looked up at him. Her face was streaked and dirty, and her eyes were swollen from crying, and there was adhesive residue on her cheeks and blood on her wrists, and she was 14 years old, and she looked like she had just walked out of a war. But her voice when it came was steady, cracked at the edges but steady at the center. The voice of someone who had made a decision and was executing it. I need to give my statement now, she said. Hargrove opened his mouth to say what he was trained to say, that she should wait, that she should rest. That a trained interviewer would take her statement at the hospital in a comfortable room with a social worker present and a cup of hot chocolate and all the time in the world. That was the protocol. That was what they taught. But the girl standing in front of him was not following protocol. The girl standing in front of him had spent the last 2 hours in a trunk gathering intelligence with the discipline of a trained operative and the courage of someone 3 times her age. She was not going to wait. Waiting was for people who did not have information that could save 11 lives. Okay, Hargrove said. Tell me what you know. Wren told him. She started at the beginning. Not the emotional beginning, not the fear in the darkness and the hands grabbing her from a Tuesday afternoon. The operational beginning. She delivered the information in order. Chronological, precise. The van, white Dodge Caravan, dent in the rear quarter panel, tinted windows, gray commercial carpet inside. 2 men initially. She gave their descriptions. Heights, builds, distinguishing features. Grigor Dasig, shaved head, tattoo on his left wrist, Cyrillic letters, blue ink faded, and approximately 40 years old. Drove the van and later the Honda. Vadim Morin, late 20s, dark hair gelled back, Eastern European accent, carried a phone in his right jacket pocket, discussed pricing on the phone, $15,000, $20,000 if she was undamaged. Hargrove was writing. Price had come back from the radio and was standing behind his partner, listening. Neither of them interrupted her. The storage facility, keypad entry. She did not know the address, but she could describe the route. Left from the abduction site, then straight for approximately 7 minutes, then right, then another right. Rows of garage-sized units. Gate rolled open after Gregor entered a code. The unit was in the back, hidden from the road. They transferred her to a Honda Accord. Gray, older model, stolen. Nevada plates beginning 7KR. The trunk, motor oil smell. Spare tire. Jack, damp blankets. She estimated 20 minutes of highway driving before the first gas stop based on the consistent speed and road surface. The name Oleg. Mentioned 3 times by Gregor and Vadim. Spoken with deference. Connected to a network operating across Nevada, California, and Arizona. The pipeline, international buyers, the price structure, $15,000 for damaged merchandise, $20,000 for undamaged. Then the detail that made Hargrove's pen stop moving. 11 more girls, Wren said, scheduled for December. Different sources, different cities. Gregor and Vadim discussed it in the car. They talked about it the way people talk about a delivery schedule, dates and logistics and numbers. She paused. The next part was harder, not because she did not remember, but because she did. I heard them change the drop location. They were originally going to Building 2, but someone called Gregor and told him to switch to Building 6. The person on the phone said there was activity near Building 2. Too many vehicles. They changed it because they were being careful. 4 men were waiting here instead of 2, armed. Oleg wanted extra security. Hargrove looked up from his notes. You heard all of this from inside the trunk. I pressed my ear against the seat back. They were not quiet. They did not think I was listening. They did not think I mattered. She said the last sentence with a flatness that was more devastating than anger. A statement of fact delivered by a 14-year-old who had spent 2 hours being discussed as merchandise and had used every second of that dehumanization to build a case against the men who inflicted it. Price was staring at her with an expression that Hargrove recognized. It was the look of someone whose understanding of the world has just been rearranged. The look of a young officer realizing that courage does not look like what the movies show. Sometimes it looks like a girl in a dirty jacket with blood on her wrists reciting license plate numbers from memory. Hargrove closed his notebook. He would write the rest later. For now, he had enough. More than enough. He had a 14-year-old witness who had just handed him the skeleton of a federal trafficking case in a gravel parking lot at 3 in the morning. He looked at Forge, who had been standing 6 feet away during the entire statement. Not hovering, not intervening, just present. The way a wall is present, structural, load-bearing, there if you need to lean on it. We will take care of them, Hargrove said, nodding toward the men on the ground. Detectives are 5 minutes out. Ambulance, too. She needs to go to the hospital. Forge nodded, looked at Wren. You hear that? Wren looked at Gregor. He was still on his knees. His face had gone from fear to calculation, the kind of calculation that involved lawyers and bail, and the machinery of a system that sometimes let men like him slip through its gears. She walked toward him. Every man in the circle watched her. 510 men in leather and chrome watching a 14-year-old girl walk across a gravel lot toward the man who had put her in a trunk. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody tried to stop her because something in the way she walked, steady and deliberate and aimed like an arrow, told everyone present that this was hers. This moment belonged to her. She stopped 3 feet in front of Gregor, looked down at him. He was kneeling in gravel with his hands behind his head, and she was standing above him, and for the first time in 3 hours, the geometry of power between them had reversed completely. I remember everything she said. Her voice was not loud. It carried the way Forge's voice carried. Not through volume, but through weight. I remember the tattoo on your wrist. I remember the code you punched into the gate at the storage facility. I remember the first 3 characters of the license plate. I remember that you smoked Marlboro Reds and that there was a Burger King bag under the front seat of the van. I remember that you said 15,000 if I was damaged and 20 if I was not. I remember the name Oleg and the 11 girls in December. I remember everything you said and everything you did, and I am going to make sure that every single word of it follows you for the rest of your life. Gregor looked up at her, at the 14-year-old girl he had zip-tied and duct-taped and locked in a trunk and discussed as cargo. And he saw something in her eyes that was worse than the 510 men standing in a circle around him. Worse than the police lights painting the lot. Worse than the handcuffs that were coming. He saw a witness who had paid attention, a witness who remembered, a witness who was going to testify. Ren turned away from him, walked back to where Forge was standing. She did not look at Gregor again. He was no longer worth looking at. He was evidence now, something to be processed and filed and locked away. More vehicles were arriving, 2 more patrol cars, an unmarked sedan that had to be detectives, an ambulance with its lights flashing but sirens silent. The system assembling itself around the scene the way it always did, methodical and thorough, and exactly on time for something that was already over. Paramedics approached Ren. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and latex gloves crouched to Ren's eye level. "Hey there, I am Sarah. I am going to check you over. Make sure everything is all right. Can you tell me if anything hurts?" Ren shook her head. "I am okay. That is good, but I am still going to look." The paramedic checked her wrists where the zip ties had cut into skin, checked vitals, blood pressure, pulse, shined a light in her eyes, asked clinical questions about pain and dizziness in a voice calibrated to be gentle without being condescending. Behind them, one of the detectives was talking to Hargrove. Ren heard fragments. Trafficking network, FBI jurisdiction. Media is going to be all over this. Hargrove's response was too quiet to catch, but the detective nodded and typed notes on a tablet. The paramedic helped Ren toward the ambulance. She was halfway up the steps when she turned back. "Forge," she called. He walked over, stopped at the bottom of the steps, looked up at her. From this angle, with her standing above him, she looked taller than she was. Or maybe she was taller than she had been 3 hours ago. Maybe the night had added something to her that could not be measured in inches. "Your vest," Ren said. She started to take it off. "Keep it," Forge said. "For now. You can give it back later if you want, but for now, keep it." Ren pulled it tighter around herself, nodded. "Thank you," she said, for the 3rd time. The words still felt insufficient, like trying to describe an ocean with a thimble. "You already thanked me." "I will probably thank you 100 more times." Something crossed Forge's face that might have been a smile. Might have been. It was gone too quickly to identify with certainty. "Get some rest, Ren. You earned it." The ambulance doors closed. The vehicle pulled away. Its lights painted the desert in rotating colors that faded into the darkness as it rounded the bend and disappeared. Forge watched it go, watched until the last flicker of red and blue was absorbed by the night. Then he turned back to the lot. The police were processing the scene, photographing, bagging evidence, loading the suspects into patrol cars. Gregor had started talking, asking for a lawyer, demanding rights. His voice had found its courage again, now that the system was present and the rules applied, And the 510 men in leather were not the only authority in the lot. Hargrove approached Forge one final time. "I do not know who you are," Hargrove said quietly, "and I am not sure I want to know. But that girl is alive because of you, because you answered the phone, because you showed up." He paused. "So whatever happens next, whatever I write in my report, I want you to know that I see what you did tonight." Forge nodded once. "Appreciate that, officer. You should go. Before more units arrive, before someone higher up the chain starts asking questions I cannot not answer." "Understood." Forge raised two fingers. The signal moved through the lot in a wave. 510 men mounted their bikes, turned keys, engines caught in sequence. The sound built one final time, rolling thunder that was quieter now, more controlled. They were not riding to war anymore. They were going home. The column reformed, pulled out of the lot in precise formation. Forge went last. He always went last. He took one final look at the scene. The police lights, the evidence markers, the gray Honda Accord sitting empty with its trunk still open like a mouth that had tried to swallow something and failed. Then he rode out into the October night. The diner sat at the edge of nowhere, a chrome-sided relic from the 1950s that served coffee strong enough to strip paint and pie that had not changed its recipe in 40 years. It was called the Silver Spur, and at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in October, it was empty except for a waitress reading a paperback behind the counter and a man in a federal jacket sitting in the back booth nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Special Agent Sutridge was 42 years old and had been with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force for 11 years. He had seen things that kept him awake at night, had testified at trials that made juries close their eyes, had pulled children from situations that made the Ren Calloway case look like a footnote. He was good at his job, dedicated, by the book, which was why what happened tonight was a problem. Forge walked through the diner's front door at exactly 2:47 in the morning. He did not look at the waitress, did not scan the room, just walked straight to the back booth and slid into the seat across from Sutridge like they had been meeting in this booth for years, which in a sense they had. Sutridge looked up from his coffee. "You made quite an entrance tonight. Girl needed help. 510 motorcycles showing up at an active crime scene is not help. It is an invasion. She is alive. She is safe. The men who took her are in custody. I would say that qualifies." Sutridge leaned back. "You know what Henderson PD is going to put in their report? Do not particularly care. They are going to say an unknown vigilante group interfered with an active investigation. They are going to recommend that the DA look into obstruction charges." Forge's expression did not change. "They're going to mention the part where we handed them a trafficking network on a silver platter. The part where your task force just got 18 months of work done in one night." Sutridge's jaw tightened. "That is why I am here. That is why this conversation is happening at 3 in the morning in a diner instead of in an interrogation room." He pulled a tablet from his jacket, turned it to face Forge. The screen showed a file directory, dozens of folders, hundreds of documents, cell tower data, financial records, surveillance footage, wire transfer receipts. A complete anatomical diagram of a trafficking operation that spanned 4 states and involved 47 individuals. "This is good work," Sutridge said quietly. "This is better than good. This is federal prosecutor dream levels of documentation. With this, we can dismantle the entire network. Not just Gregor and Vadim, everyone, top to bottom." "So what is the problem?" "The problem is that none of this is admissible. The problem is that I cannot explain where it came from without opening a door that ends with someone asking how a motorcycle club got access to encrypted financial databases. The problem is that if I use this, I am complicit in whatever methods your tech guy used to obtain it." Forge was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, low and measured. "So do not use it in court. Use it as a roadmap. Follow the leads. Build your own case. I am giving you the answers. All you have to do is show your work. You know that is not how this is supposed to work. I know exactly how it is supposed to work. Girl gets taken. Police file a report. FBI opens an investigation. 18 months later, maybe you make an arrest. Maybe. Meanwhile, 12 more girls disappear while you are building your case. His eyes were hard and flat and carried the temperature of something that had been frozen for a very long time. System is broken, Agent Sutridge. You know it. I know it. Only difference is, hey, I do not have to pretend otherwise. Sutridge closed his eyes, rubbed the bridge of his nose. He had known this conversation would go this way, had known it from the moment Hargrove called 3 hours ago, had known it because he had been having variations of this conversation with Forge for 5 years now, ever since the first anonymous tip showed up in his email with documentation that broke open a case that had been stalled for 2 years. I cannot protect you forever, Sutridge said. Sooner or later, someone higher up is going to notice the pattern. Connect the dots, and when they do, I will not be able to stop what happens next. I am not asking for protection. I am asking you to do your job with the information you have been given. What you do with it, how you explain it, that is your problem. Mine is making sure girls like Wren make it home. Sutridge was quiet for a long moment. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The waitress turned a page in her paperback. Outside, the desert was vast and dark and indifferent. The 11 other names on that list, Sutridge said, the ones scheduled for December delivery. You planning on doing something about those? Already being handled. By who? People you do not want to know about. Sutridge nodded slowly. Just try to keep it quiet. Try not to leave a trail that leads back to me having to explain why I am not arresting you. No promises. Then Sutridge did something he had not planned to do. He opened a second file on the tablet. An older file, archived, the kind of file that lives in the deep storage of federal databases where cold cases go to gather digital dust. There is something else, Sutridge said. His voice had changed, softer, careful. The tone of a man who is about to show someone something that will hurt. The file contained records recovered from the network's oldest servers, financial transactions dating back decades, shipping manifests and communication logs and photographs, dozens of photographs, low resolution, scanned from originals that were probably sitting in a box in a storage unit in a country that did not extradite. Sutridge turned the tablet so Forge could see, scrolled to a photograph dated March 1995, Reno, Nevada. The photograph was grainy, taken with equipment that was 25 years obsolete. It showed a parking lot, a mall, a figure in the background, small, partially obscured by a vehicle. Young, female. The resolution was too poor to identify a face with certainty, but the hair was right. The height was right. The location was right. The date was right, then on. Forge stared at the photograph. His hands were on the table. They did not move. His face did not move. Nothing moved except something behind his eyes that was not visible to anyone looking from the outside, but was in the private interior of a man who had been carrying a wound for a quarter-century, the most seismic event of his life. We cannot confirm it, Sutridge said quietly. The resolution is not good enough for facial recognition, but the metadata matches. The location matches. The date is 3 days after your sister was reported missing. Forge did not speak. The silence in the booth had a weight that pressed down on the table, and the coffee cups and the laminated menus and the worn vinyl seats. This network has been operating for more than 25 years, Sutridge continued. What that girl tonight, what Wren did, the information she gathered from inside that trunk, it unlocked files we have been trying to crack for a decade. The name Olek, the operational structure, the December pipeline. Her testimony is the key that opens this entire thing. He paused. A 14-year-old girl in a trunk gave us more actionable intelligence in 2 hours than my task force produced in 18 months. I do not know whether that makes me proud of her or ashamed of us. Forge was still looking at the photograph. At the blurred figure in a parking lot in Reno in March of 1995. It could have been anyone. It could have been Kara. He would never know. The resolution would not let him know. The years would not let him know. The network that had taken her, if they had taken her, had been dismantled tonight by a chain of events that started with a 14-year-old girl pressing 9 random buttons on a phone she could not see. He had not saved Kira. He had not found her. 25 years of searching, and he had not found her. But the girl he had found, the girl who had called him by accident and given him the name that had haunted him for 15 years, that girl was alive. She was in a hospital bed right now, with her mother beside her and a biker's vest over the back of a chair, and her wrist bandaged in her statement on record. She was alive because she had refused to be cargo, because she had listened and remembered and tapped out letters in the dark, because she had made choices that most adults would not have had the clarity or the courage to make. And because of her choices, because of her information, the network was crumbling. 11 girls would not disappear in December. 47 names on a list were being investigated. An operation that had run for 25 years was being dismantled piece by piece by piece. Forge looked up from the tablet. Ren Calloway is asking for you, Sutridge said. She told the detective she wants to see you. Thank you properly. Her mother wants to meet you too. I will visit when the dust settles. You should go soon. Girl like that, what she went through, she needs to see that the people who came for her are real, that she did not imagine it. Forge nodded once. Sutridge stood, dropped a 20 on the table for coffee he had not finished. He walked toward the door, stopped halfway, turned back. For what it is worth, he said, I am glad you answered that phone call. I am glad you got there in time. And I am glad there are still people who give a damn enough to actually do something instead of filing paperwork and hoping the system catches up. System does work, Forge said, just not fast enough for the people who need it most. Sutridge left. Forge sat alone in the booth for another 20 minutes, drank cold coffee, watched the sky through the window change from black to deep blue to the pale gray that arrives just before dawn. His phone buzzed. Text from Spark, all 11 accounted for. Safe. Families notified, network scrambling. They know something hit them, but they do not know what. Might want to lay low for a few days. Forge typed back. Copy that. Good work tonight. We do good work every night, boss. Tonight we just did it louder. Forge almost smiled. Almost. He paid his tab, left a tip that was too generous. Walked out into the parking lot where his Road King sat waiting under a flickering streetlight. The desert air was cold and clean, and the kind of cold that clears your head and reminds you that the world is larger than the darkness you have been staring into. He rode back to Henderson as the sun came up. The highway was empty, just him and the road and the low rumble of his engine and the kishy turning from gray to pink to the pale gold of early morning. Saturday came 2 days later. The Calloway house was small and tidy, the kind of suburban home that testified to a single parent working hard to build a life that looked stable, even when the foundation underneath was held together with overtime shifts and willpower. The lawn was mowed. Flowers were planted along the walkway. There was a basketball hoop in the driveway with a net that had seen better days. Forge pulled up on his motorcycle at exactly 2 in the afternoon. He had showered, shaved, put on his cleanest jeans and a shirt that did not have holes. It was the closest thing to formal he owned. The front door opened before he made it halfway up the walk. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, eyes red from crying that had started 3 days ago and had not entirely stopped. Marlo Calloway, Ren's mother, the woman who worked 2 jobs and had not bought herself new shoes in 2 years and had spent 3 hours on a Tuesday night believing her daughter was gone forever. You are Forge, she said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. She walked down the steps, stopped 3 feet in front of him, looked up at this massive, scarred stranger who had ridden across the desert with 510 men to pull her daughter out of hell, and she hugged him. It was not a polite hug, not the kind exchanged between acquaintances at social functions. It was the kind that comes from a place beyond language. From a mother who had felt the world crack open beneath her feet and then felt it close again because a stranger answered a phone. Her face pressed against his chest and her hands gripped his shirt, and she held on with the strength of someone who understood how close she had come to losing everything. Forge stood very still. His arms came up awkwardly, patted her back in the universal gesture of a man who did not know what to do with emotional displays but was trying his best. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. She is okay, Forge asked. Marlo pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She is strong. Stronger than I knew. She is in therapy, having nightmares. But she is here. She is alive. And that is because of you. She saved herself, Forge said. I just answered the phone. You did more than that. The front door opened again. Ren stepped out. She was wearing jeans and an oversized sweater. Her hair was down. Her wrists were bandaged with clean white gauze. She looked smaller than she had in the darkness of the warehouse lot. Younger, but there was something in her eyes that had not been there before Tuesday. Something that looked like steel wrapped in bruises. "Hi," she said. "Hey, Ren." She walked down the steps, stopped in front of him. "I still have your vest. It is inside. I can get it if you want it back." "Keep it. Already told you. It is yours." "I wore it to my first therapy session," Ren said. "My therapist asked about it. I told her it belonged to the man who answered my call. She said it was a symbol of safety, that it was okay to need that right now." "Your therapist is smart. She is." Ren looked down at her bandaged hands, then back up at Forge. "I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead. Why did you answer? You did not know me." "You did not know what was happening." "Was I the happening?" "It was an unknown number. Most people would have ignored it. Why did you not?" The question hung in the air between them. Forge could have given her the easy answer. Could have said instinct. Could have said luck. Could have said he answered every call because that was club policy and left it at that. Instead, he told her the truth. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "Kira, she was 14. Someone took her when I was 19. I looked for her for years, never found her." He paused. The October afternoon was warm and the street was quiet, and somewhere down the block a sprinkler was running, and a dog was barking at nothing, and the world was doing what the world does, which is continuing regardless of what happens inside it. "When you called, when I heard your voice, I heard her. And I decided right then that I was not going to spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done something. Not this time. This time I could, so I did." Ren's eyes filled. "I am sorry about your sister." "Me too. But you are here, and that counts for something." Ren stepped forward and hugged him. Not like her mother had. Gentler, but just as fierce. The hug of someone who understood loss because she had almost become one. "Thank you for showing up," she said. "Thank you for staying brave long enough for me to get there." They stood like that for a moment. Then Ren pulled back. "I am going to study criminal justice," she said. "When I graduate, I am going to work with trafficking victims. Help them the way you help me, the way I help myself." Forge looked at this 14-year-old girl who had survived something that broke most adults and was already planning how to turn it into purpose. "You are going to be good at that," he said. "I learned from the best." He stayed for coffee, met Ren's aunt who had flown in from California, answered questions about the rescue that he kept vague and nonspecific, accepted thanks from neighbors who had heard what happened and wanted to shake his hand. And when he climbed back on his motorcycle and turned the key, he looked back at the small house with its mowed lawn and basketball hoop and saw Ren standing in the doorway, wrapped in his vest with the Iron Saints patches catching the afternoon sun. She waved. He raised one hand. She waved again. Then he rode away. 3 months later, the first day of spring came early to Henderson, Nevada. The sky was clear. The temperature was perfect. And Ren Calloway walked out her front door on her way to school with her backpack over one shoulder and her phone in her pocket, in the particular stride of someone who has been through the worst thing and come out the other side still walking. She stopped on the sidewalk, looked up and down her street, and saw them. 510 motorcycles parked on both sides of the road for 6 blocks, their riders standing beside them in perfect silence. A corridor of leather and chrome and Iron Saints patches stretching from her front door to the entrance of Henderson High School. Forge stood at the front. He was holding a leather jacket, custom made, her size, an honorary Iron Saints patch stitched to the back. Inside the lining, 510 signatures. Every man who had ridden that night, every name written in ink on leather as a promise that did not need to be spoken, because it had already been kept. Ren walked down her front steps, took the jacket, put it on. It fit perfectly. She looked at Forge. He nodded once. Then she walked down the corridor between the rows of bikers. Each one nodded as she passed. Silent respect, silent promise. "You are one of us now, always." She reached the school entrance, turned back. The bikers were already mounting up, engines starting in sequence. The sound building like distant thunder rolling across a clear sky. Ren waved. 510 men nodded in unison. Then they rode away. The sound faded slowly. a long, diminishing rumble that took its time leaving as if it wanted to make sure she heard it all the way to the last echo. Wren stood and watched until the last taillight disappeared around the corner. Then she turned and walked into school. Head high, shoulders back, wearing armor made of leather and signatures, and the knowledge that somewhere out there 510 people had her back. Not because they had to, not because they were paid to, because when it mattered most, she had called for help and they had answered. That night in a cinder block building off Boulder Highway Forge, sat behind the bar of the Iron Saints clubhouse. The place was quiet. His brothers had gone home. The neon sign out front flickered its broken rhythm. Saints on iron off, saints on iron off. The phone sat on the shelf behind him. The same burner that had rung 3 months ago, silent now, but ready. He looked at the tattoo on his forearm, the small angel drawn in simple lines, the name beneath it. Kira, 1981 to 1995. I am still looking, he said quietly to the empty room. And every time I find one, I am finding you too. The phone stayed silent. The night stayed still. The desert wind moved through Henderson the way it always moved, patient and unhurried, carrying the dust of one season into the next. But Forge would be there when the phone rang. He would always be there. Because that is what you do when someone taught you that answering matters. And a 14-year-old girl in a trunk pressing 9 random numbers in the dark had taught him that lesson better than anyone.